welcome to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Isla MacGregor. Isla MacGregor has been a free speech and whistleblower advocate in Tasmania, Australia for over 30 years. In the mid-1980s, she worked in the Tasmanian peace movement and greatly benefited from non-violence workshops, but especially group work on active listening. MacGregor would carry these skills on with her work in advocating for whistleblowers, supporting freedom of speech for government employees in particular. Over many years, she campaigned for the establishment of an anti-corruption commission in Tasmania. She worked with the Coalition for Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse in 2003. And from 2016 through 2025, she has worked with Women Speak Tasmania with a focus on the repeal of sex self-ID laws and the promotion of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. I welcome Isla MacGregor to Savage Minds. After October 7th in 2023, you put a post on your Facebook page of 5 maps which showed the progress of colonization in Palestine by Israel over the past 8 decades. You are someone who has always opposed Israeli terrorism towards Palestine, the West Bank, and neighboring countries, the nexus between Israel and the US, and the military trade from foreign powers with Israel. You were not surprised to get aggressive feedback to your post from gender-critical women with whom you had worked, but you had also made the decision to keep your focus on your work in women's rights and other campaigns related to women's rights. That is, until recently, when you began to post more frequently on the genocide, both around Facebook groups and then on your own wall. As you wrote me recently, I could not contain myself any longer, and I understood that this would have blowback, and it has. So I wanted to speak to you precisely because after months of having what I call genocidal feminists attack me and others for articles we've been running, I wrote on my wall that these women were ironically behaving like the very transgender cult members that they criticized. I even pointed to the fact that these women are good at lending historical materialist readings to their criticism of gender ideology, but they fail to see reality when it comes to the genocide in Gaza. In essence, that the feminists treat Gaza as trans women are women, paradoxically. And right after I wrote this, someone responded saying, Isla MacGregor just said the same thing. And I went to search you out, and here you are. So welcome to the show. And I would like, if you could kick off with telling our audience about how you came to the similar conclusion as me, perhaps beginning with your gradual transition from avoiding posting online around October 2023 to where you are today.
Well, where I am today in making my views very public about this issue is really focused on posting information on my website for anybody to read, on my Facebook page for anybody to read, from sources that they're not generally getting. One of the things that has alarmed me very much about the blowback that I've had from feminists, non-feminists who are colleagues in the sex-based rights campaign, is the absolute ignorance of the history of Palestine and the Israeli conflict, and the fact that the ignorance is embodied in the sort of defenses that people put up to defend Israelis' actions in Palestine, whether they be religious, anti-Muslim, or, I think there's a third one in there somewhere. So I think that it was very important to me to analyze why there was this intense hostility and the same type of slurs and slogans that were being used by defenders of Israel's actions in response to the October 7th attack that I have seen repeatedly in the trans rights movement. And it only occurred to me the other day to actually start writing this up, to look at the comparison between these sort of very nasty and aggressive tactics, PR tactics, I call them, that the gender ideologues have used against women's rights activists. And what I found was an absolute parallel to the tactics used by the Israelis and are generally used in war. And I think this was very alarming to me because, war's a dirty business. They're brutal businesses, and they invariably involve propaganda. Wars are created by propaganda. They're maintained by propaganda. And I'd like to go back about 30 years ago um, to a campaign that I was not working on in relation to an environmental matter. And there was a PR strategy leaked to an environmental group. It was a 10-point plan on how to undermine your opponents. And this model was something that I reflected on in writing up a comparison which I have done just in the last few days to look at how very much the same they are.
Having observed the manipulation of language, as you wrote me, you have observed then the same tactics. I would like to read through some of the stuff that you've been sent, even that I've been sent, because this is phenomenal. We've got the same enemies. Ooh, wow. I used to respect you, Isla. What a disappointment to hear you have Israel derangement syndrome. They've given it a name, so it must be a thing, right?
Yep.
Israel and all Jews the world over are just a red herring. You are also an infidel, and they want you dead too, just like they're slaughtering Christians in Nigeria, Yazidis, Hindus. They want all non-Muslims like yourself converted or dead. That was by our friend Belissa Cohen, who's come on the show. And since also, October 2023, I received several public missives from her about how my show sucks, da 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 da. Of course, right? They love you when they love you, and then when they don't, they go for the jugular.
Yep.
Napoleon Jones gave you one of those. That's what I call the trans twist on educate yourself. Remember that from
Right.
2014, 15? As a historian who has spent more than 50 years studying European history from 1900 to 1945, let me give you some advice, dot, dot, dot. One of the things that has also shocked me, I don't know how many of these you received. I received so many. Well, if you think they're so nice to lesbians, why don't you go there and see what happens? And many rape fantasy projections from feminists saying, go and get raped, then come back and tell me about your time there. And then I've told these people, well, I have lived there, unraped, alhamdulillah. Why don't you go there? Because the irony is that the very people who've never been to the Arab world are making these claims, right? Here's a lovely other. Of course, Hamas committed no war crimes. They only slaughtered 1,200 innocent Jewish people and then held many prisoners underground, many for more than 2 years. Hamas, the glimmer of hope for the West. That was by Sue Clark. And again, more fascinating ahistorical tidbits here, because they don't mention of the 1,200 innocent Jewish people were a slew of IDF that many killed were not in fact killed by Hamas. Even the IDF admits this, but what do facts matter today, right?
Well, they don't.
Yeah, well, please feel free to read some more. You sent me.
Yes. Oh, look, one of the most revealing ones, and I think the language in this is astonishing, from Grace O'Malley. I thought I'd cleansed my friends list of all the Jew-hating liars, but somehow missed you. That was an amazing one. Another one from a person who has now defriended me, claims the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, an act of war perpetrated by Hamas. She went on, that one of the worst acts of barbarous and depraved terrorism in recent history was perpetrated against a whole bunch of innocent young people at a music festival where over 350 of them got raped, mutilated, and massacred. she went on, Hamas had a choice in the first months of this conflict to surrender and hand back the hostages they took. They refused to, and instead chose to prolong the war using their own citizens as human shields. She went on, you are just yet another person from the left who believes that Israel does not have the right to exist, which seems to stem from anti-Semitism. Decided to unfriend you as I'm sick of your Jew-hating rants. You just seem so full of vitriolic hatred for both Jews and also transgender people. So, you know, and she ended up saying, you just seem to lack compassion for anyone. Now, this is so similar to trans rights activists saying, you're not being kind. You're presenting facts.
Right? You're saying we don't exist.
Yes,
Well,
yes,
you
yes,
exist because you're
yes.
tweeting me, threats right now. So you clearly exist, but we just don't agree that you're a woman. Yeah. And so it's the same slipping point there, that to disagree means to deny the existence of. I don't think anyone, including Hamas, would deny that Israel exists.
That's right. I mean, this is one of the things that I've done in my comparison between, the gender ideology tactics and Israeli strategies. In my list, I say, accuse opponents of wanting to erase us. Yeah, rings a bell.
This is back to the transgender advocates claiming that feminist criticism of this ideology is an attempt to literally, this is what they literally kill us.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And also, for instance, weaponize historical or alleged victimhood status using a constructed historical narrative. So I mean, this is the Holocaust victimhood being continually utilized to underpin the justification for any actions by Israel. And of course, the fact with the gender ideology issue, we've got them saying, oh, there have always been transgender people around. They've just been terribly victimized and mistreated. And of course, we see this with the reclamation of so many individuals who they're now claiming from history who are trans. And we see it in Tasmania.
Yes. Well, in fact, Tasmania was one of the battlegrounds for certain kinds of rights, beginning with lesbian rights to congregate and to have an event without the presence of men who identify as.
Yeah.
And this is ironic as well, because what I found over the past 2+ years is that many of the people with whom I agree now on the genocide in Gaza are fellow leftists and a lot of men who identify as women. And people say, how can you post Owen Jones to your wall? He's against women's rights. And I'm like, yeah, he's got a blind spot on the trans issue, but he's spot on about Gaza. What can I say? I'm not going to no platform someone because they do. Yeah.
Yes, 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 absolutely. Um, this is one of the things that the gender critical movement in Australia has struggled with. On which platform are you to be seen? Standing next to people you might disagree with on other issues. This has caused a lot of friction in the women's movement here. The organisation I work with have been very solid on the fact that we will stand on any platform, just about, with people who support our policies, particularly when it comes to politicians, public figures, because we're a lobby organisation. And our organisation has people from all walks of life in it across the political spectrum. And so therefore, we are prepared to, be shoulder to shoulder with people who share our basic goals, which is repeal of sex self-ID laws. But we have been viciously attacked by certain left-wing feminist groups, publicly, I should say, for being associated with people that they accuse of. And here we get into the language stuff about how you demonize your opponents, instead of sticking to the issues, who are racist, anti, anti, whatever, so that, you know, in the manipulation of language in in the gender debate and also the Israeli debate, what we see is that the tactic is demonize and discredit your opponents, by either calling them transphobes, bigots, or haters, or anti-Semitic Islamists or terrorists. So we live in this sort of prevailing culture, which has really become very embedded with, the demonization and dehumanization of opponents, as we have seen with the Palestinians, instead of sticking to the issue at hand. And of course, this was something that Charlie Kirk was talking about, the need for robust, open debate without resorting to hate, anger, revenge, hostility, retaliation. And of course, these are all the things that we found in the gender critical debate, the means by which they take you down, or in the Israeli sense, take you out.
Absolutely. In fact, I have been contacted by so many women who were upset by what's happening. And they said, this is not a movement for me anymore. I can't have anything to do with these women. Yet they were afraid to speak out, including fellow writers and journalists, because they don't want to be harassed. They don't want to be threatened. They don't want to be mobbed. And yet, one of these journalists wrote about 7 October and the fictions that have been churned out, the racism which has astroturfed the legitimization of a genocide. And really, that's really what's gone on
Yes.
here. And she got blowback for that. So when I see this incredible ignorance by white feminists, I mean, let's just be clear. There's a reason why. I did an interview the other day, in fact, with a scholar who mentioned this. He said, when the Me Too movement happened, or when the accusations against men without due process happened, a lot of women of color, they don't want to get involved with that. Why don't they want to get involved with
No.
that? Because look back to my country's history, that it was called lynching, and it was called no due process, and it was called weaponizing rape is not conspiracy theory. It is a fact. We can see what happened with Julian Assange as well. The US/CIA tried to shut him down, fabricated and had fabricated by women. We know the story because now these women, they're on record. Well, it wasn't rape, and they were approached. We really have to be careful about the whole weaponization of rape as a political maneuver to shut down, or to, in this case, far worse than shut down discussion or shut down due process, or to have trial by media or social media. The worst part that's happened has been this. You have all the Hasbro projections of 7 October with no evidence behind it.
Well, I was just going to bring in this issue of evidence. I mean, what did we learn from the trans rights debate? That they push a narrative not based on any hard evidence or rigorous peer-reviewed research whatsoever. And yet, many people in the community are not interested in the evidence. And when you give them the evidence, they don't want to read it. They don't care. And getting back to this deterrent issue, I mean, when we get attacked in social media groups, whether they're private or whatever, for sharing, our compassion for, a decades-long of oppression of the Palestinian community and colonization by Israel, imperialist, brutal colonization, they just get frightened to actually develop an understanding for the reality, the material and historical reality. because they know that they will get blowback. And this is why I think it's so hurtful for so many feminists involved in the sex-based rights campaign, that they are being shut down by other women. They are now withdrawing, so they've been siloed from the broader society as an erased class of people, in relation to the laws that are depriving them of their status as a sex and all the consequences of that. And here we go again in another scenario to do with a global conflict, if you like, whereby they are too frightened to engage.
Exactly. And we're seeing how on Twitter, for instance, X, whatever, that you have certain women who are speaking out, and they get sometimes the likes of women, but it's really still hard for women to address this because many are afraid of the retaliation that will happen. Others don't want to be dislodging what they think is the greater good, fighting for sex-based rights. They see, and it is a conflict, because if you're going to kick women out of the very movement that they helped to foment over years of advocating against this transgender madness, well, then you're sort of making an own goal, because more and more women, I mean, what's going to happen when more and more countries say this is a genocide? These women are going to be standing alone on the tip of an iceberg, and they will have nothing but themselves to blame for the situation in which they find themselves. Even now, you're seeing some people shifting. It's interesting to see how some media entities, and I mean legacy media entities, are starting to shift the language and now beginning to discuss openly starvation, hinting at, but not yet saying the G word, but we're seeing that they're readying themselves to say genocide. Now, these feminists are not, because they're still on the racist trope of Arab man. I don't know if you've had a chance to hear my interview with Ramzi Baroud. He goes after these women because I asked him about it. I said, what do you have to say about all these women who are parroting the non-fact-based hypotheses of rapes on 7 October? And I'm one of the people that discovered the hokiness of the accusations because I read the tablet piece on this. And I'm thinking, this is fake. As fake as the letter is between Robinson, the alleged Charlie Kirk shooter, and his boyfriend. That's how fake it is. I looked into her angelic face. It was something about her angelic face. Who watches a rape? Who observes a rape and thinks angelic face? Says nobody. And so I started to investigate. And I even sent Max Blumenthal 2 phone numbers of witnesses that were cited in one media report. And I needed to find a Hebrew speaker. And because I had a crisis within my family, I could not follow anything up. That's why I've been largely doing editorial work the last 2 years. But what was interesting to me is the hokiness, the fakery around the alleged reports of this, and then they all melted away, including that massive New York Times piece, which in all due right should have been retracted and an apology issued, especially since the subject of that piece and her family objected. She wasn't raped. Still, you have feminists sharing the very piece that the actual person says, I wasn't raped, and they're sharing it as rape. It is insane. It really is proof of an inherent racism within a movement that fails to understand both facts and history. Because as you've seen, the feminists pretend that Hamas kicked everything off on 7 October.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes.
How frightening.
Yes.
Yeah. That's very female penis.
Look, I don't know whether all feminists think that, but I think...
When I say the feminists, I mean the ones that we've been dealing with. In fact, the liberal feminists, what I call the pole dancing feminists, or the ones who buttress the TWAW narrative, they also are the ones we're rubbing elbows with over the Gaza issue, because the pole dancing feminists are also, they tend to be anti-genocidal. So we're in strange company, you and I.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I haven't had any comments talking about the 40 beheaded babies, but I've frequently put up information about the Hill and Knowlton PR job on the Kuwaiti humidity crib baby scandal, which is, the biggest red flag that you can show to people about how countries, are pushed into war by PR and tried and repeatedly used tactics of propaganda. It's a red flag, and yet people are still prepared to jump to conclusions based on prejudices and not wait for the post-mortem. But of course, in Gaza, the post in Palestine, the post-mortem is ongoing. We've already got sufficient evidence to say, for instance, that, I mean, you would know better the history than me, coming so late to researching the history myself, that, the two-state solution negotiations been going on probably since 1948, 1972, and ongoing.
There have been so many discussions that these feminists have lost any kind of coherence in demonstrating that they understand a thing, for starters. It would be like me interviewing you and kicking off with this, because I know so much about Tasmania. I would like to know if you could talk to me about that scientific reality of the Tasmanian devil, because that's what I know about your country, is about this little creature that spins around and creates a lot of dirt. That is what I know about your country. So you must be surrounded by them. Yes. Yeah, this is on par with what the feminists have done. Yeah. So can you tell us about the Tasmanian devil and Bugs Bunny? Because I think they met once, didn't they?
Yes, Walt Disney. Yes, he did a Tasmanian devil skit. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So I mean, but
back in the 1960s.
Yeah, I mean, this is really worrying to me as well, to see attacks on women using the very tropes that these feminists claim they're against. I referred earlier to the rape fantasy that they've pulled on me, and they've pulled it on other women. Why don't you go to Iran and see what happens to you as a lesbian? The subtext is clear. Go get raped, come back, talk to us about it. Same thing with Gaza. Why don't you go and see what Hamas does to you? Well, they're either wishing me to be beheaded or raped or the oven. Yeah, the oven, which is paradoxical because the oven story is actually perpetrated by Israelis, not by Hamas. But this goes way back to the inception of the state of Israel. I'm thinking that where you talk about weaponizing historical information or alleged victimhood status, ignoring legal judgments and crime data.
Yep.
They're big on that. They don't care that there have been no women coming forward saying that they were raped.
No, and repeatedly I get this distraction tactic. Distract by bringing in other conflicts, Nigeria, Sudan, other human rights abuses. Distract by saying, "Oh, but you're not talking about these other things." And the other thing is, and I saw this online, a video of an IDF soldier saying, "Oh, we felt unsafe, so we just shot them." And of course, this is this concept of, from the genderists is, they make us feel uncomfortable, unsafe, so we will no platform them. They can't have their meetings at the Burnie Public Library and the Devonport Library because it will hurt trans people. It will hurt trans people for women to meet in a meeting room with a closed door that they can't hear what they're talking about, because our group has been banned by Libraries Tasmania from speaking about these issues. So, the censorship, the banning, the targeting of dissenters and their families, and dealing with them, and denying that there are, for instance, Israelis and Jews within Israel who support the end of the genocide and a two-state solution. Denying, I mean, it's just the non-response, the stonewalling The stonewalling is just such a classic.
Also, the fact that they conveniently allied all the persecutions of Muslims, from Burkina Faso's mass shooting in a mosque in the north of the country, which left almost 20 people dead in 2019, going to Chad. In 1979, there were anti-Muslim riots throughout southern Chad. In 2022, in Ethiopia, there were a group of Christian extremists that opened fire at a Muslim funeral, killing 20 people. In Mali, there were several attacks in 2019, which killed over 50 people of Muslim Fulani herdsmen. When you go to places like Central African Republic in 2013, there was an anti-Balaka militiaman who targeted the Bangui Muslim neighborhoods there. Or go to the very well-known Rohingya massacres, right? But they don't mention that. So let's just pretend that the Buddhists aren't doing that in what is now called Myanmar, or the Philippines, the Moro people who live in the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao in the southern provinces, who remain discriminated against in terms of employment, housing, education, and they are frequently portrayed as warmongers, as terrorists, similar to what we're dealing with these feminists. And Sri Lanka, we can go there, another religious minority, aside from there are many ethnic minorities in Sri Lanka, like in India, or look at Modi, what he's doing and what has done, or the Gujarat massacres, which has even divided my family, because my family is Gujarati Hindu. So there's so much to say about the cherry picking they do, because the cherry picking is invariably about a very Orientalist subject matter that they would like to take aim at, never other groups.
I think that from my own personal experience, the issue of how we have and conduct public discourse and public debate very much is being focused on by a lot of intellectuals now and activists, because we know that there are overarching umbrella issues under which all the issues come under, and those issues are things fundamental to democratic processes like freedom of speech, right to assembly, freedom of affiliation. But we haven't used those fundamental concepts to develop a way of engaging with others. And this is one of the things that I said, for instance, to my daughter, who I am now estranged from for the last 6 years, that it was the way that you deal with difference, that you can get to a point where you can agree to disagree without hating each other, without publicly denouncing the person, demonizing them, disassociating from them, or denying what it is that they have to offer for the debate. I call it the 4Ds. And I think that the feminist movement really needs to look at how they operate. And I think in some ways, they need to take a leaf out of the book in the 1980s, when, for instance, I was involved in the peace movement, where we did a lot of nonviolence training, a lot of group process workshops on active listening and conflict resolution. And I think that the women's movement and all movements actually could benefit from those sort of training processes to develop a more robust position from which to engage in differences of opinion at all levels in our society.
You're listening to Savage Minds, and we hope you're enjoying the show. Please consider subscribing. We don't accept any money from corporate or commercial sponsors, and we depend upon listeners and readers just like you. Now, back to our show. Some of the things that you've told me and sent me via email, also the dodgy manipulations, aside from character assassination, threats of any kind of dissenting commentary towards the posters' families to deplatform them, to deny the reality, to assert opponents' views where their presence makes us feel uncomfortable or unsafe. Can you talk about some of the things that you have seen around this issue, even in the time that you decided to focus on women's issues and not respond to it, to not rock the boat too much?
Well, because I come from a background of advocacy for whistleblowers and freedom of speech, and I don't want to get into the debate of free speech versus fair speech here, I suppose I've been fairly fearless about the need to speak out and to talk about the issues around transparency of information and due processes. I think it's really important for me to continue speaking out on issues where I feel that many of my colleagues are too afraid, because I'm a person, like a lot of the women in the women's movement, who I call the untouchables, and they can only speak up because they can't be got at. They haven't got children at home, or they never had children. They're retired. They're financially secure. And strangely enough, I've never been targeted by the gender lobby in this state in any of those ways that other women are targeted, because they're vulnerable. I'm not vulnerable. So I think that, in a sense, it's really important on this issue to speak up on the issue of the genocide in Gaza, and understanding that so many people are so engaged in the heat of this debate here, not based on any real understanding of the history, that we talk about the tactics that are used to silence people and to suppress debate. It's really very, very, very important for Tasmanians as much as it is internationally, but it's also important for activists, critics, advocates to reflect on their own behaviours and to see where their double standards lie. And I mean, I have to look at my own double standards. I have to look at why, for instance, I didn't enter this um, uh, uh, Gaza genocide issue earlier, because I was more focused on the fight on women's rights. And I know that the backlash on this issue has been extreme for decades. It's a very scary one to get into. But I think we've got to, as one friend said, put my big girl pants on. Excuse the girl bit, but we have to put our big girl pants on and be courageous enough to ask the questions. And that's what I've been doing on my Facebook page. I've been posting things that are asking. And of course, this is the one thing that the gender lobby don't do. This is where they shut you down. You can't ask the questions. The journalists won't cover you because you're asking the questions.
Well, I'm going to ask you a very tough question now, because I think it's something that we need to discuss. Women, feminists, whatever that person identifies as. I view my work as being that of human rights. Where women's rights are concerned, you can bet that men's rights are going to also be violated, especially with what we have seen with Gaza, what we have seen with the Rohingya massacres, what we have seen with any kind of mass exodus of people, such as what happened with the US support and the NATO invasion of Libya, overturning one of the most stable governments in Africa. And the feminists yesterday, I responded to one of them who posted this nonsensical little blip from the Heritage Foundation. So now the feminists are allying themselves with a far-right organization that basically was eliding the whole issue of the US involvement and the rape at bayonet. The rape at bayonet of Muammar Gaddafi that no feminist talks about, right? Because that's okay. Men can be raped with a bayonet. That's fine. And this is the problem that I'm having with feminism. As someone who, I do not call myself a feminist, I support human rights, and that means women's rights. And it means everyone's rights. So this is my issue. When I saw what happened with the media working up of and contingent to a film that came out about the likes of Russell Brand, where you had journalists going after him because they were like scraping up who can give us some dirt so we can make an article,
Yeah.
so we can make a TV show. Fuck due process. Who needs that? Let's do something that we know will get clicks, that we know will get the public very angry, especially the women. It was very successful as a tactic.
Yep.
But my problem is this, Isla. Feminists of the type we're discussing, the ones who deny the genocide in Gaza, they are the very ones who do not buttress scientific data, who do not buttress due process, something that we as women should be very concerned about. Due process is vital to our societies.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And in the same way you were suggesting earlier that women should undertake training that is related to spaces, that is not specific only to feminism, that is related to human rights, that is related to who is disempowered by war, by famine, by World Bank and other such policies that render countries dependent upon Western quote unquote aid, but we can reverse that and call it for the grand theft larceny that it is as well. So when you start to look at this problem of rape and the way it is presented by these feminists regarding 7 October 2023, it just occurs to me that rape is a very convenient trope for some dim-witted people or people with a political axe to grind to be in the same boat and to continue parroting this. And I do think that some of the people parroting this madness are not dimwits. I think they're very intelligent people who know exactly how to get women behind them. It's a very cheap, low-hanging fruit type of modality to get women saying the same thing, but do they care that what they are saying is both not factual or not proven, and that it most definitely has undergirded the public support for the genocide in Gaza?
Yes, look, I agree. I think that my coming fairly late to this issue, I knew that I had to do a lot of research and do a lot of reading very fast, and I've been very interested to get up to speed with it. And up till then, I refrained from much commentary. I've always been alerted to the propaganda of war, and therefore I've been very reluctant to bring down the anvil one way or the other, the due process issue. I'm very suspicious of the propaganda that Israel has been pumping out for a long time, and the billions that they spend on it. So I am surprised that a lot of feminists are so quick to, as you say, jump on the rape issue without, and we discussed this early in the interview, actually waiting for the inevitable discovery.
I came into the trans issue while heavily pregnant in a lesbian bar, in a gay bar, I guess, in Soho in the summer of 2012, where one woman came to me and started talking to me about how crazy the transgender movement was in Britain. And I thought she had a few too many drinks. And I was listening to her and I just thought, okay, she's drunk too much. This is totally not happening here. She told me so many things. I didn't believe any of it, to be quite frank. I went home, Googled, and I was like, holy shit, she was telling me the truth. Oh my God, she might have been drunk, but she was telling me the truth. And I became friends with this woman later, a very lovely woman. And it was shocking to me to see that when I ran my first piece on this, the summer of 2013, I spent over 6 months researching and writing, that the response to this was death threats, many death threats. We had to leave the country for several months. When I came back to the UK, I kept publishing with Counterpunch until one day, about 2 years later, I'm guessing, I got the famous email saying, we want to run your stuff, but just not on gender, because they were getting pushback from their readers. The same readers, by the way, that left them, one of them and their daughters, rape threats and death threats, just like we had received. So this was insanity to me. And at the same time that I buttressed and I supported these women in what they were saying, I've covered their voices because they were important voices to cover. I wonder, how can you not see what you are contributing to now?
What, talking about your experiences as a journalist, one of the things that I was incomprehensible to me was that over 260 journalists in Gaza have been murdered, and that no journalists are allowed in from other countries. Israel's stopping that.
Not even now, post ceasefire, so to speak, right?
No, that's right. And this is just absolutely outrageous. Once again, red flag, red flag. And you know, a good friend of mine in the gender critical movement said to me, "Oh, but they were all Hamas. 260 of them were all Hamas. So therefore, it was justified in bombing them." But she won't talk about all the hostages that have been murdered by Israeli bombs.
Well, they won't talk about the 1 million hostages that the state of Israel has had since 1948. And you can all check this out because I asked Grok. It's very hard to get the data on this, but Israel has basically kidnapped a total of 1 million Palestinians, and I'm betting that's a low number, since the inception of the Israeli state. That means that the arrest of mostly men, which is mostly happening without trial, 1 million. So a little over a week ago, when the hostage versus prisoner exchange happened, I wondered, why are all the legacy media outlets calling this Israeli hostages but Palestinian prisoners? Let's use the same language here. This is ridiculous. IDF soldiers are innocent, Hamas are guilty, right?
That's right. Once again, it's the manipulation of language. And I think that was the first point in my PR strategy comparison, is to, construct the correct language. So, we see that in war, and we see that in the gender debate. We see it in every, corporate controversy in relation to environmental issues as well.
This morning, I woke up to this statement. I was tagged in a tweet along with Max Blumenthal, Brianna Joy, Katie Halper, many others, Aaron Mate. Welcome to our new organization, Feminists Against Anti-Semitism. We've been working hard behind the scenes all week creating Feminists Against Anti-Semitism. They've been working at that? Okay. To confront a painful silence, to confront the fact that the sexual violence committed against Israeli women on October 7th was met with denial or erasure in many feminist and progressive spaces. Jewish women were excluded from the solidarity they should have received, and too often from feminism itself. So they've actually anthropomorphized feminism here. Feminism is now an entity, it's a person. Join us, ready for our official launch tomorrow as we continue the work we began at our fringe event. This is a space for a feminism that lives up to its name. Sig Heil. I don't know what else to say after reading something like that. This is crazy. I'm sorry. I mean, and so unironically, the way they parrot the trans language here, erasing our language.
Yes, well, there we go. That's one of the points I use, accuse opponents of wanting to erase us. And this is, one of the things, the difference between war and the social engineering project of gender ideology is that in war you erase people physically, and in the social engineering project you erase people through law. Another thing that people don't want to respond to, the fact that Palestine also apparently, as far back as the 1930s, was quite a secular society, from what I have been told. But as I say, you would know a lot more about that. And the churches that have been bombed, the Christian churches that have been bombed, the fact that there have been Christians working with Hamas.
Plus the idea that one can just make monolith of a group of people as you sit from your keyboard in Brighton and you pretend that you understand the world over there as your government is sending money and doing spying missions over Gaza, sending information to Mossad, to the IDF heads. There's something very worrying about what's going on, to include the fact Heather had to go to her hearing last week. Her trial is now set for March of 2026. I joke with her sometimes. I said, were there any feminists there to support you? Because she has also made herself persona non grata for the pieces she's written for Savage Minds on this issue. But it's so coherent, everything she's saying.
Look, what I don't understand, there are three things that I fundamentally oppose: extremism by any group, violence, killing, rape, murder, torture, and the colonisation of a country by another country. And the military backing, four things: the military backing and the military trade by countries who claim to have clean hands, that they are providing military aid to countries that are doing all these four things, up to and including genocide in Palestine. That, all this, denial about the responsibility when this has been going on for decades in Palestine. And I think that's very sad that within the feminist movement, we can't, share some basic humanitarian principles about nonviolence, about being, peace activists, opposing war, opposing any killing, saying that there is no justification for war. There is none. There is just an excuse for an inability to negotiate with humanity for a peaceful settlement,
The group we're talking about, these genocide feminists, is that they are unable to understand the very basic link, and it's a very real link. There's nothing tenuous about it. Violence affects women and children first and foremost.
Yes.
Obviously, after the male fighter is killed, but the after effect of all bombs, all missiles, all starvation is going to hit women and children. What is keeping these feminists from seeing that it's a truism? Why aren't they seeing it? I feel like I'm in Sixth Sense, where the kid sees ghosts everywhere. And it's like they see rape everywhere. And we're seeing the connection between humanitarian disaster and the dispossession of all basic rights. And I'm not talking about women's rights. I'm talking about the rights to breathe. Yeah?
The right to life. And they don't seem to be talking about how many 30,000 children have been blown to pieces. They're not talking about that. But look, I think that quite often where you've got a controversy and you've got a difference of opinion, that one of the things I said to a friend the other day was, do you understand that the people that you oppose, who you are demonizing, you think are evil, actually might have good reasons. When for instance a person here calls a person a racist, right? Sometimes the arguments that a person has present as racism, but their underpinning raison d'etre is not necessarily racism. And I think that's because of their very blinkered analysis on a particular issue, like the lens of radical feminism or any other political theory. That if you only apply one political theory to analysing events or controversies, you're missing out on the use of other theories to inform you.
Furthermore, I would say that this shows a kind of weakness within what the feminist approach to their political venture is, really. How can you possibly extricate 50% of the population, but on the basis that your argument of origin is that they've been excluding you? It seems like we're at this kind of crossroads where I wanted to tell the feminists, play nice.
Yeah. Look, I support the right of any group to affiliate with any other people of their choice. From the perspective of the women's group that I work with, we work with men. Men can be members of our organisation, and we work collaboratively, and we work very happily with them. We don't have an issue, and we encourage them to come in and to do whatever it is they want to do. And and we're fine working with people from all the political spectrums and religions, because I mean, that's another issue that's gone out the window. I mean, I sometimes wonder, I mean, I know a lot of feminists are anti-religion, uh, extremely anti-religion, and I absolutely understand the reasons. I'm not here to go into that. But I think that, if you want to, promote a, a pluralist society, accept a pluralist society, accept that we don't want everybody to think like us, be like us, like the trans people do with their social engineering, to accept what diversity is by excluding other people, then we have to actually embrace that. And I think that one of the things that people do is, in particular, they demonize all people who come from Middle Eastern countries or, Asia, Muslims. They demonize them and they say, basically, they just want you to be wearing a burqa, that you're subservient. They have all these terrible things they can do you to you, you know, and therefore they're all like that. And there's they have an extremist view of Muslims as being all extremists. There is no nuance. And, I have endless discussions about this with people. So, you know, I mean,
No, but
this
it's
is,
funny because years ago when I was working on a project about the disappearance of Muslim men post 9/11, I had friends of mine, and by friends I mean not white friends, who were asking me if I wanted to become a Muslim. Why were you
yeah,
working on this? And I'm thinking, I had to look over my shoulder. I'm thinking, what? This was post 9/11,
yeah,
where the onslaught of the US version of Hasbara also affected Americans. I'll never forget, I went up to Malcolm X Boulevard. I was in the mosque. I was interviewing people about any kind of surveillance that they might have experienced, because the FBI was surveying Muslim men, including in the African American communities. And the one thing that I found is they were saying things that finally it's not us. Finally, we're not at the other end of the microscope. And so
yeah,
you had this kind of I see nothing, I hear nothing attitude where I actually expected a bit more solidarity because the disappearances were severe. But I think that there is a larger problem, even beyond the feminists, of Islamophobia. But Netanyahu is no dummy. He knew to use the rape hoax would get easily a good chunk of women in on his
mm,
side, right?
yep, yep, tactics, yep.
And so have you been deplatformed yourself from groups?
Well, not. I've been deplatformed from speaking publicly about the Cass report, and also our organisation has compiled a detailed dossier of the impacts of self-ID laws on women, children, LGBT people, and families in Tasmania. I think we're probably the only state that's actually been collating evidence over many years, which we've produced in this dossier. But I haven't been kicked out of a group. But then I I don't belong to any private Facebook groups, for instance. I haven't got time for private Facebook groups. I believe in being quite public. So I haven't been kicked out of any groups that I belong to. No, no, I have not. But certainly been no platformed using the usual tactics by the gender lobby. All the ones we've been talking about tonight.
And what do you say to these feminists who are listening to you now? What do you have to say to them about what you think they should be doing? Because I find it really hard to convince them to even listen. It's wild.
Yes, I left a private Facebook group recently that I very rarely was on, because this was a group focused on women's rights. They started to talk about uh, the Gaza situation, and this was really fraught, because most of the women on that group were pro-Israeli, and it was completely destructive to the capability of that group going on to bring in this issue. And as one good friend of mine says about the issue of sex-based rights and the women's issues, is eyes front. And unfortunately, that has to be the case where you've got women's groups that are primarily focused on the hard basket issues of self-ID, prostitution, trafficking, pornography, and surrogacy. So that is the focus of those groups. I mean, essentially, I mean, we need to revamp the old peace groups that we had back in the 80s if we're going to be moving forward at the grassroots level. But in response to your question, what would I like to say to women who are listening to me? I'd like to say that what I have experienced, both in the sex-based rights movement and also entering this discussion on the genocide in Gaza, is we need to look at these basic criteria of the strategies which I've presented in this comparative analysis about how we engage in public debates and how we can see through the strategies that are used to undermine the capacity to discuss the evidence. This is most important. The evidence, to wait for the evidence, unfortunately, to be released, to be investigated, and to then start to develop an opinion on something. Now, in the sex-based rights issue, we were well advanced. We had the evidence. More and more has been developing since then, and it's been coming out. We've got the impacts, we've got the legal judgments, we've got the court cases, all this sort of stuff. But in the war in Gaza, there is a lot more to come out. So I think that it would serve us all well to be a little bit more patient, a little bit more thoughtful, reflect on our own behaviour in terms of, are we actually doing the hating that our culture has basically, led us to participate in. About 2 years ago, I spoke to a very good colleague of mine who I have huge respect for. And this colleague said to me that many years ago, she was one of those people who did hate the opponents. Oh, yes, I was a hater. And I was so glad that she put it in the past tense. I was a hater. So I think, hate is a very, very destructive and negative emotion. And I think that we all need to learn to be less reactive, to be a little bit more self-centered in our openness to ask questions and to seek the knowledge. And if we don't have the time to do that, then just be a little bit more respectful in the general public debate on these issues.
I think that's a good point that you raise about this kind of hating or demonization of the other, because what I've started to do, even with the feminists, it's not like I hate any of them. It's just I look at this as some kind of weird circus and I try to understand why. I don't want to go to the ad hom that they do with us. We're rape apologists. We hate women. I always knew, those stories that we're told. But I think I would like for these people to be, maybe, self-reflection is too much to ask people. This is one of the problems. Another huge problem, and maybe this is the primary problem, is these debates are happening on social media. Were we in a room together? Would it be different? I wasn't at the Philia conference. It sounds like it was a little girls gone wild there, but it was not respectful. And then there was a lot of ad hom happening about women whom I actually know. So what was this about, really? Why, on the one hand, you want to point to women of color as your allies so that you can prop up the non-racist nature of your organization, but then when it suits you, you throw them under the bus, and we know who these women are. So I really have problems with the way in which feminists are not wanting to take accountability for their actions, and I think it's high time they did.
Well, I think another issue that a lot of my colleagues have been raising is about this whole concept of identity. And identity politics is wrapped up in not just the trans movement, but identifying as a feminist, identifying as just about anything, as belonging to a culture. I think that, one of our critiques about gender ideology in schools is that we need to, for instance, be, concentrating on helping children to build their character and their personality. And the wide variety of aspects to human life that make up a character and a personality. And I think that ideology, adhering to a set ideology, is counterproductive to developing, the human character in all its richness. And I think that's an issue that I've come to, that I think inherently, since a very young person involved in anti-war rallies, for instance, I rejected the imperative of accepting and being indoctrinated into any ideology. I've always been ideologically resistant. That doesn't mean that radical feminist theory doesn't necessarily present to me, a very good way of analysing the world. But, I've very much moved away from any form of labelling of identity, whereas I used to be quite happy with that. I used to say, if people don't like me calling myself something, well, that's their problem. Well, actually, no, it's not their problem. It's my problem, because it shuts the door. It closes me in a box. And this is what people have always said about labels. I don't like labels because I don't want to be boxed. I want to be treated at a spontaneous level as a human being, to have people open enough to ask me questions, to engage, and me to ask them questions with an open mind. That takes time. Not everybody's got the luxury to engage with other human beings like that.